Qatar has spent a massive amount of money on the World Cup, around $220 billion, which dwarfs expenditure on any other previous World Cup. And just to give you a sense of how much they've spent, it's more than 15 times that of the World Cup in Russia in 2018. But will it pay off? Today, actually, what I want to do is look at 10 advantages of buying real estate in Qatar and see if the World Cup has made any difference or will make any difference. So I do want to start with number one, and that is, of course, the World Cup. Now, major sporting events do tend to have benefits for the cities or countries involved. We can look at particular Barcelona back in 1992, and the Olympics there brought Barcelona into the eyes of the world, and property prices did go up a fair bit after that. And the same happened as well at the Beijing Olympics and Athens to a certain extent as well. But there are examples where major sporting events didn't help the economy or property prices in certain countries. And one such example is Brazil, and in particular Rio. Brazil had both the Olympics and the World Cup in a space of 2 years, but it didn't help the economy or property prices. But going back to where major sporting events have helped, it did help in a particular area of London called Newham after the 2012 Olympics. But also Sydney as well. Sydney had the Olympics back in 2000, and property prices after that also shot up. So in my opinion, although it's going to be limited, I reckon there will be some benefit for house prices in the future for Qatar, because it has brought Qatar into the eyes of the world. But what I want to do is look at other benefits of investing in the Qatar real estate market. So number one being the World Cup and having slight benefits, I want to go on to point number two. And point number two is that Qatar is a very rich country and comes out regularly on or near the top when it comes to GDP per capita, in particular on purchasing power parity. And actually over 1/6 of Qataris are dollar millionaires. And per capita, Qatar has the most millionaires in the world. So it's a very, very rich country. Now, point number three, and I want to come to property prices. Now, on average, property prices are not particularly high. In Doha, we are talking just over 4,000 US dollars per square meter, which is much cheaper than cities like London, Paris, and Berlin, where wages and GDP per head are much, much lower than Qatar. So this would indicate that property prices are not incredibly high in Qatar. Now, let's talk again with salaries. The salaries are very, very high in Qatar. And you're talking about, for example, IT managers can easily earn 13 to 14,000 US dollars a month. And lawyers and doctors are not far behind. So salaries in this country are very high. And as you know, there's no income tax. Number five, there are some decent yields in Qatar, although yield data is generally hard to come by in this country. It is believed you can get yields of around 6%, which is not bad, in particular if you compare it to Western European countries. But gone are the days where you could get double-digit yields, and I'll explain why in my disadvantages section of the video. Six, let's talk about openness. Qatar is considered the most open country in the Middle East. In Doha, you actually have a complex called Church City, where you have Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox churches. So you can pray freely here, and it is a very, very open society. Number seven, demographics. Now, although Qatar's birth rate is going down like many countries in the world, at 1.8 per woman, it is still relatively high, and it's much higher than the UAE, which is around 1.37. And the population of Qatar has been rising. From 2010 to 2020, it actually rose by 67.5%, according to the Qatari census. Now, that's a massive jump, and that would indicate that property prices will go up in the future, in particular because it is expected the population will continue to grow in this country. And another good thing is the population density, which is fairly high, and it's actually much higher than the UAE. So this is another good indication that property prices should continue to go up in the future. Now, I want to come now to point number 8, and I think obviously this is a very important point, and it's taxation. Taxation is very, very low in Qatar. There are no wealth or inheritance taxes or gift taxes. Property taxes are pretty negligible. And if you are a resident in this country, there is no rental income tax or capital gains tax. And non-residents will pay a very low rate of 10%. But also the good thing is for rental income tax, there are 25% deduction expenses allowed. So in effect, it's only 7.5%. And also here, the buy-sell costs are very, very low. Number 9, let's talk briefly about the Qatar Investment Authority, which was set up in 2005 to diversify the country's economy away from natural gas and oil. It has an estimated fund of $450 billion, and they've invested this all around the world. So they've got lots of money invested in real estate in London and in other parts of the world. They're actually invested, they bought Paris Saint-Germain football club in France, and as I say, they've got investments all over the US and Asia as well. And this is very good. But the other good thing is that they're not going to run out of natural gas or oil anytime soon. But they've still been very, very good at foreseeing the future. Number 10, if you buy a property worth $200,000 in Qatar, it does give you temporary residence. And if you buy property for over $1 million, it gives you permanent residency. However, you must stay 90 days every year in the country. So I've given you some pretty good advantages there of buying property in Qatar, and how the World Cup, I think, will actually help, albeit slightly, for future growth. Now let's look at some disadvantages. And the main one is similar to the problem in Dubai, and that is an oversupply of housing. And just like Dubai, too much property is being built. It's estimated actually that in 2022, around 3 times as many housing units will have been built compared to 2021. And this is bound to have an effect on property prices. And indeed, if we look at property prices year to quarter 2 2022 and adjust for inflation, property prices actually fell by nearly 5%, according to the Central Bank of Qatar. And if we don't adjust it for inflation, property prices were virtually unchanged. And since then, property prices have actually continued to decline. So this is a major, major problem in Qatar. And also, I want to talk again about yields. Yields are not as high as they used to be, and this is related to point 1, disadvantage, where there's too many units being built, so the yields are lower as well. And also, there are a limited number of places you can buy freehold property if you are an expat investor in Qatar. 3 of the most famous areas are the Pearl, West Bay Lagoon, and the second city of Lusail. So it's very limited where you can buy, although they have actually raised the number of places where you can buy freehold and indeed leasehold property. It's still limited. So the question is, should you actually invest in property in Qatar? Well, my point, I think you can do. I think if you come to live in Qatar and have a good job in this country, there's a lot you can do, because you will pay no capital gains tax, and you can actually buy and sell property, but you've actually got to know the market, because property is built and then it can go down in value. It's not a place actually like Bulgaria, for example, where you can buy a property in central Sofia, you can buy it on the Black Sea in Varna, for example, buy the property, leave it for a number of years, rent it out, and pretty much you know property prices are going to rise. Here, you've got to know your market. You really have to know your market, the area, the building, because it's a good place, for example, to buy, maybe sell the property at a higher price. But property can lose value in certain buildings because the newness goes. So you really need to know your market. So in my opinion, if you actually go and live in Qatar, you can make some money on the property market. Now, if you don't live in Qatar, the only way I would suggest is that you come here regularly and look at the market and what's going on, because I think you're not going to make much money by just buying one property somewhere, leaving it for 10, 15 years, because the market will have moved on, new property would have been built. Anyway, those are my opinions. I'd love to know your opinions on Qatar. Would you consider buying property here? I certainly think it's better than the UAE, but you have to be careful. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks ever so much for watching this video, and I shall see you very soon on the next.